Hello and welcome to episode 249 of the Clean Energy Show. This is a special 5th anniversary episode. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Woo!
Hello.
We look back at 5 years this week of your favorite Clean Energy Show podcast and dissect which episodes Brian was an AI and which were really him. See if you can tell from his next joke.
Also, 3 Baltic states have disconnected from the Russian power grid and have hooked up to the EU instead. Workers literally cut the cord and took home pieces as souvenirs. Other souvenirs included safety, security, and peace of mind.
I break down how much clean energy progress there's been since the day we started the podcast 5 years ago exactly. You will not believe the progress, neither did most of the clean energy analysts in 2020.
Renewables provided a full 90% of new U.S. grid capacity in 2024. 81% of this came from solar, while surprisingly, 2% was from hamsters running on those tiny little wheels.
All that and a whole whack more on this special anniversary edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week, after we hit the hour mark, we're going to transition to the Patreon episode for our Patreon Clean Clubbers. I have stories over there for the importance of solar in Gaza, which is incredibly high. I noticed from watching footage that there was a lot of solar. Well, I went and discovered why. And we also discuss a recent episode of The Daily, where a reporter in China explains how Chinese automakers got to where they are in just 5 short years, Brian.
Yeah, lots to go here. This is an unusual setup here. James is in person with me here in the bomb shelter. We've set up 3 cameras. We've been doing tech support for the last hour, trying to get all this running. It's running, and, let's keep it going before it all shuts down.
Yeah, we have no staff. So exactly 5 years ago, we were here in your bomb shelter with the intention, I guess, of doing it every week. My Leaf had a heater back then. I joyously rode across town, and it is the other end of town. And we sat down and did the podcast every day, and then it was... We did 5 shows here. I went and looked at the archives, and there's a video tour of Brian's bomb shelter where we are on our Patreon page for free for everyone. Go have a look at it. And 5 shows, and then came March 18th, 2020, episode 6. We were in social isolation. And I'm James Whittingham. Brian, welcome to the end of the world. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I don't know what you're referring to. Is there something going on?
You've not been out of your bomb shelter? You have to leave.
Listen, I've been in the bomb shelter with Jared Leto for the last week.
By the way, we should mention that we are social isolating socially.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of jokes going around on the internet, people on Twitter making jokes about, starting a podcast while they're in quarantine.
Screw them, we're way ahead of you.
We're way ahead of the curve. This is episode 6, I believe. So
wow.
We're 6 weeks ahead of the curve.
We should be good by now. It's good to be here. I don't have to wear pants. There's not that social pressure. All right. Well, we stayed apart, Brian. For simplicity, we got that well-oiled machine going. It's weird to look at you.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
What are you doing? Who is this man?
It's like I'm seeing the podcast in person at a live event or something.
I'm so used to looking at your tiny head and a monitor at an odd angle on Skype. But this is in person. Theoretically, we'll have a different conversational tone here in person, but I'm just uncomfortable with it, frankly.
Well, and I'm trying to remember the Jared Leto reference, and it was something to do where he was off on vacation or something, and he was oblivious to the news about COVID or something. I think that's what that was.
Oh, okay. Well, when we started, you had an EV charger, but no EV.
Yeah.
And I used to plug in, and then we just sort of set up on our 2 places and eventually got really used to it. But it was also very good to talk to someone every week during that early days of lockdown, because I think I would have gone insane if I didn't, because I wasn't seeing anyone. No one was seeing anyone, really.
But, I have a lot of fond memories of that time, so I'm really surprised it was only 5 episodes before we went into lockdown. I remember sitting here. I had the radon meter here one time. You were across from me.
Right.
I think we reset it, and then we sort of waited for the radon meter results to come up in person, live on the air, live as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I think that was normal. I can't remember, but I did end up getting radon mitigation done for my basement, so hopefully there's no radon gas. It's a problem we have around here where we live. It's this odorless, colorless gas
And
that,
then I took the radon meter home during isolation
Yeah.
for like 3 months and did a run. Then I found out I had a 1-inch hole in my wall that may have negated
right.
the whole thing. But yeah, I remember your chair was hard. You've graciously given me an ass pad for this week, and it's made a huge difference
Yeah.
compared to my memories of here,
Yeah.
because I remember getting sore. And we only did half-hour podcasts back then.
Yeah.
They slowly stretched out into an hour.
Yeah. And the idea was keep the chairs uncomfortable so it'll keep us on pace and keep
Sure.
things rolling. And we'll want to wrap it up because the chairs
Yeah.
are
But
uncomfortable.
we did get a lot looser over those 5 episodes, I think. But
Yeah.
I was listening to some of them.
Yeah. And I do like doing it in person. I don't know if we're going to keep doing it in person because it is a bit of a hassle to set
Holy
all this
crap,
up.
it's a hassle.
We're so used to doing it. But, I always hate the delay of talking to somebody over a Skype connection. And we've gotten it really good where it's a very small delay, but still
Weird making actual eye contact with you. It's so weird. It's like, I'm not comfortable with it. It's like, you're too close.
Yeah, yeah.
We need a bigger table.
Or like you need to be looking at something else.
Yes,
I don't know.
I need a picture of you on the monitor
That's right.
to make me comfortable.
I'm used to looking at a tiny picture of James here, but anyway, we've got a 3-camera setup. Hopefully it all works out. Okay, so I thought this was a good 5th anniversary type story. I was at the local coffee shop yesterday, and I was getting up to leave, and my friend Philip was there. I see him there occasionally, and he wanted to stop and talk to me, and he said, "Hey, I've got this friend in Ottawa," and he just asked me, "Hey, do you know Brian Stockton? Because I listened to his podcast."
Wow.
And I just love stories like that because we know we have download statistics, so we have a rough
There's
idea.
people out there listening to us.
We
We
know
don't always know who they all are.
that's right. We know that there's people listening to us, but I always love those kinds of interactions that actually prove that people are listening to us. So shout out to Philip's friend in Ottawa. I don't know his name, but he knows who he is.
Thank you for listening. And yeah, I don't know. Let's keep it going. Remember, I'm going to play some old elements here from the show that are now retired. This is the retro lightning round.
The Clean Energy Show Lightning Round.
Now that brings back memories. And we will have the lightning round later in the show, as always. And by the way, I'm introducing a Patreon contest. If you sign up for a free Patreon account and join our Patreon, I guess, for free, you will have a chance to win a 1-year Clean Club membership in March. So go sign up for a free account. Lots of you have, and you'll still be eligible. And we will do a draw. I will reach into a hat live on the air and pull out some person's name, perhaps the person in Ottawa, who knows? Could be in Uganda. And someone will get a free year of Clean Club membership on our Patreon, where you get our bonus episode, which we'll be getting into later today. And yeah, and there's also, remember, a brief video tour of Brian's bomb shelter,
Yeah.
which you need to see because it's weird.
We've talked about it before. This house was built in 1962. It is a fallout shelter. It's been covered in an academic paper. I had an academic researcher come down here one time and look at it and take pictures. And
Really?
yeah, I don't know if you can find it on the internet, but I have a copy of it. And there's pictures of my fallout shelter in this academic paper.
Is your name attached to it?
No, it's all anonymized. But
Okay.
so you wouldn't be able to tell which one is
Does
mine.
it say Regina, Saskatchewan? Or
Oh,
Bernard?
it probably does. Yeah, yeah. It's about, fallout shelters in the prairies and
And by the way, it's minus 30 Celsius, so it was a bit of an ordeal to get here this morning. So fortunately, it's sunny. Yeah. So yeah, that I have headlines from the day we started the podcast, and that's the day that COVID-19 was coined by the World Health Organization. And that the day we started this podcast on February 12th, 2020, 43,000 people worldwide were infected, resulting in 1,017 deaths. In Toronto, restaurant owners have been reporting up to a 30% reduction in business. Boy, would that change? Despite Canada having only 7 confirmed COVID cases at that time. And Elon Musk was starting to tweet weird things. He was tweeting a bizarre Sonic-themed meme of Bernie Sanders, and that got worse. A climate report around the time we started podcasting 5 years ago estimated that there might be 2.5 million EVs on the road by 2030. And Gartner Inc. predicts there will be over 85 million at the start of this year.
Wow.
That was way off.
Yeah. A lot of those kind of predictions.
Yeah. And the Model S had the longest range at the time of any electric vehicle out there, which was 373 miles, or just shy of 600 kilometers. It charged at 250 kilowatt peak. The Porsche Taycan was also coming out around that time, and it was charging at 350 kilowatts peak, but now there are cars in China charging up to 600 kilowatts peak. There were 127 Teslas in Saskatchewan, which actually seems high to me.
Yeah. I would have had, around number 200 or so, because I bought mine shortly after we started.
Yeah, it
the
was March,
podcast.
I think you received it, and that was your first EV?
That's right. It was right when lockdown started, because I somehow had to get the license plates through lockdown, and we talked about it on the podcast at the time, I know, and I think they slipped it to us under the door or something. It was a no-contact pickup for the license plates.
Through the end of 2028, Northvolt estimated approximately 210 gigawatts of new installed stationary energy capacity globally. That's 210 gigawatts is what they estimated. But yeah, we reached that 3 years early.
Yeah.
It's way 5 times larger than that. Bloomberg NEF was predicting 10% of global auto sales to be fully electric by 2025. They are the big people who do this predicting. They were off.
They were
It was
off.
twice that.
Yeah, worldwide, it's about 20% now of new car sales are electric.
Solar. BNEF predicted solar to drop by 14% in price by 2025, where we are now. And it dropped around 50%. Not 14%, 50%. They've constantly been off. In 2020, solar module prices were 20 cents, and now they are as low as 6.5 cents per watt. And the average, though, is around 10 cents, depending on the module, so that's half as much. It dropped by half in 5 years. Batteries, BNEF price per kilowatt at the pack level was $180, now $110 or less. Even in China, we're looking at 60 to 70. With CEOs there aiming for much lower prices in the coming months. EV and plug-in hybrid sales in Canada totaled about 2.9% of new car sales, and it's now 13.2% at the end of last year. There were only 4 million EVs and plug-in hybrids in the world when we started, and now that's what existed in the entire world when we started. Now there's that many made every 2 months.
Wow.
So the whole world of existence when we started is now made every 2 months, and that's, of course, increasing. Most EVs are cars. Now it's hard to find one that isn't an SUV or a pickup, it seems. Fully electric EV sales were at 42% in Norway when we started. We thought that was pretty bloody amazing.
Mm-hmm.
During our first year, we were gobsmacked to learn when it surpassed 50%, but now it is closing in on 100% if you include plug-in hybrids. The New York City mayor ordered all municipal vehicles to be electric by 2040 when we started the podcast. And on July 1st of this year, all light-duty vehicles must be electric when purchased. They've upped it quite a few years, I would say.
Yeah.
15. Yeah, the Chicago Auto Show was on, and there was only a handful of electric vehicles at that show. And now it's hard to find one that isn't electric that's getting shown off. There were 15 models of electric cars for sale in the United States. Today, I couldn't even count how many there are. VW announced they'd be building their electric bus, the ID Buzz. Well, it took 5 years to get here to Western Canada anyway.
Yeah, I haven't seen one in person, but apparently they are finally out. That was a real delay.
New York City aims to make every vehicle, not just the road-going ones, electric by 2040. Oh, here's February 12th birthdays, because that's our birthday.
Okay.
Abe Lincoln.
Okay.
Christina Ricci.
Uh-huh.
Josh Brolin. Charles Darwin.
Wow.
Big name in science.
That's quite a noted green energy enthusiast, Abe Lincoln. That's interesting.
Here's one of my favorite stories from the show, shortened for TikTok. This is about how the 80s band Aha, that you had, helped Norway become electric and why they are almost at 100%.
What happened was, back in 1989, 2 members of the group, they were in Switzerland, and they bought a homemade electric car. It was somebody had taken a Fiat Panda, a tiny little car, converted it to electric. It only had 45 kilometers of range, but they bought it and they took it back to Norway. And then they got back to Norway and they found that there was no way to register an electric car. Like they didn't have a category for it, and they need to have a category for all of these things. But since it had a propane heater in it, like a motorhome, they were able to register it as a motorhome.
That's bizarre.
It's very bizarre, and it keeps going on. And they somehow managed to avoid paying the one-off registration fee for when you register a car. Again, something to do with electric cars not existing. And that kind of somehow set a precedent that other electric cars to this day don't have to pay this registration fee. It goes on. There was another thing where they decided to stop paying tolls. They have a lot of toll roads in Norway.
Yeah, okay. So some of my other stories that are favorites, the Tesla network opening to everyone and doubling chargers for everyone. And I actually made use of that. I have the adapter for that. That was a huge story. Battery recycling becoming a reality, because to this day, you still see news reports. Like I saw one yesterday of a guy in Utah who's got solar panels on his roof, a real groundbreaker, because Utahians are getting into EVs, but he says, I'm not buying one. The batteries, what do you do with them afterwards? Well, he didn't know, and the reporter didn't bother to look it up. That's just the case all the time. They are more than 100% recyclable, because the batteries that go into 95% of the materials are recycled. The minerals are recycled from those batteries right now, and it's only going to get better. And then they go into batteries that are better than the ones before. So it's like you get more power out of it than you had in the old car.
Yeah, and I always wonder about just our local waste recycling. Like we recycle our cans and our plastic and everything, but I'm never really sure if that stuff actually gets recycled, because there's mounds and mounds of it. There's probably too much to deal with, but the stuff in batteries is so valuable that it will get recycled.
Sure, you don't throw $1,000 bills in the landfill. And this is our top TikTok video, Brian. Not one of my favorite stories, but it's our top TikTok video with 1.6 million views. It's about concentrated solar power generating stations. That's where you have this big concentric circle of mirrors all focusing the sun onto this tower of liquid that gets heated, superheated, and then turns water into steam to run turbines. Well, this is that story.
Something I noticed, Brian, about these concentrated solar farms, I wondered if they were safe for birds. Turns out they're not. The birds ignite into flames, Brian. As you might expect, that's not ideal. Yeah, in fact, the bright light of the glow of all these mirrors shining on this tower attract insects, and then the birds go for the insects. And they call them streamers because you see the smoke streaming going to the ground. That's a horrible way to go.
Horrible.
But, it's also very expensive. The upside of concentrated solar is that you heat these fluids and you store them, and they continue to produce steam overnight when the sun isn't shining.
But we also had a story about an attempt in Alberta, Canada, at Medicine Hat, where it did not work because it was too cold and the snow covered the panels and it was too much work, so they dismantled it.
Yeah, and like a lot of things, just normal, regular photovoltaic solar seems to generally be the solution.
I mean, you can heat fluid with electricity from that.
These other things are probably just too complicated and unnecessary. Okay, so this is a current story, a recent story. This is from The Guardian. The Baltic states have cut the cords. So there's a few countries here. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have now disconnected from the Russian power grid. So this goes all the way back to 2014. They started thinking about doing this. That's when Russia annexed Crimea. And so they started to worry about their dependence on Russia. So, yeah, they've now done it, and they've now synchronized with the EU grid this past Sunday. So they literally cut the cord, and Russia's, the workers at the Russian border, they went up and literally cut the cables and then chopped them into pieces. And there were bystanders, and they handed them out as keepsakes to people, onlookers, and everybody was cheering. And Latvia's energy minister says, we will never use it again. We're moving on. This is, they already stopped using Russian gas, but this dependence on the grid was important because grids are about more than just the power that flows between them, but there's things like, frequencies, like you need to keep certain levels of power. And so they weren't using it so much.
You have to resync to the other grid, which is tricky.
So they weren't using it so much for power in recent years, but they were still using it to sync the grid, or,
Right.
I don't understand how that works, but
It's just the frequency. It
yeah.
has to be in sync. I remember watching a video on that.
So, yeah, they're very excited. By ending the energy dependence of the Baltic states on Russia, we're leaving the aggressor without the option of using energy as a weapon against us. That was Estonia's foreign minister.
Here,
So
here.
a nice move forward there in the Baltic states.
All right. Well, I've got some clean energy predictions for you from 2020 again when we started the podcast. A study published on ScienceDirect.com by Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Speaking of Russia, the study published that EVs are capable of attaining 11 to 28% of the global fleet by 2040. That is not going to be accurate at all. We see the trend going way away from that. Expansion of the EV fleet can cause significant instabilities in the power grid, they said.
Yeah, we hear that sometimes.
Yeah, tell that to Norway, who are living by candlelight now because they're 100% EVs and half them on the road are EVs. EVs can achieve full competitiveness by 2035. While we're there now, right as we speak, there's most cars now, and especially if you include the Chinese ones, well, it's not even close. Fuel cell EVs are set to top 13 million by 2030, said S&P Global.
Yeah, how's that going for fuel cell vehicles?
The first half of 2024, around 5,621 fuel cell vehicles were sold worldwide. 5,000. So, yeah. Good luck with that.
It's an interesting technology, but hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are not taking off as predicted.
And those sales were a 34% drop from the same period the year before. So, California had a goal of 1.5 million EVs on the road by the time we did this podcast today, here in 2025. They set that goal 3 years ago when there was only one EV on the market, the Leaf.
No, 2012.
No, they set that goal in 2012 when there was only one, my car, basically, which came out, literally months later. And the Tesla Model S was about to be released. And yet they did that. They were aspirational and they knew what was going on. And we didn't have the podcast, so they weren't listening to our podcast at the time. So I guess they were just smart. They reached their target 2 years early in 2023. Yes. So that's good. Fast charging in the United States. In 2020, there was less than 14,000 fast chargers. Now there are 41,000 fast charging connectors. And your cat is here.
The cat is here.
He's finally made an appearance, but I didn't factor your cat into the fact that I cannot touch any of my cables or my recording will stop. The problems we've had with recording cables. Boy, it's a long time since I've seen a cat in person.
So, cat's not in special appearance, but the cat's not interested in being on the show.
So 2020, 14,000 fast chargers in the United States. There are now 41,000. So that's pretty significant. In Canada, in 2020, there were 2,000 charging points. Now there are 33,000. We were way behind.
Yeah.
And things are a lot better here now. Brian owned 0 EVs in 2020 February. Now he owns 2.
Yeah.
And it's his third one.
Haven't been to a gas station in, like 4 years or something.
No, you don't buy the lottery tickets and the cigarettes? Where do you get those?
Well, exactly. I go there for car washes.
Yeah. My son was bragging about a $7 car wash in Surrey, Vancouver area. And I said, was there a gas station there? And he said, no. Well, that would be perfect for me because I have to pay extra money because we don't buy gas. We don't get the $2 off to buy gas. That's one of the disadvantages of having an EV. Solar, when we started podcasting 5 years ago, the BNEF was way off in their predictions, and they've gotten better, though. I would say they're getting smarter about it.
People are starting to understand that these are S-curves of adoption. They are not linear.
So things are improving quite a bit. Yeah, there's 2,000 gigawatts of solar worldwide. India is predicted to have 80 gigawatts of solar. 2 days ago, they hit 100 gigawatts, but that will practically double basically what they have in the pipeline. And Electric's headline for the debut that we started was, Tesla has started the deforestation process at Gigafactory Berlin. And that did not go well. Yeah. World Bank said 11% of the world lived without electricity in 2020 when we started. Now it's down to 8.5%, even though the world population has expanded. That's good, but we can do an awful lot better. Brian, I'd like to talk a little bit about China if I could. 8 million EVs in the world when we started the podcast. China EV exports in 2020 were China vehicle exports were 1.1 million. And in 2024 right now, last year, they were 6.4 million. Of course, that's come a long way, and I'm going to talk about that on the Patreon podcast. Car safety, Brian, is something that is the last vestige of what my doubts were about China vehicles. Are they safe? Are they reliable? And I had no idea. And of course, I had bias against it. I made assumptions. A lot of people do. Well, Kyle Connor, the YouTuber who went there, has a lot to say about that. And he said, because this is the one of the big comments he gets in his comment section is, yeah, they're great cars, but are they any good? Are they safe? Well, here's what he had to say.
That has been the number one comment, maybe not the number one, but the top 5 comments we've received on our stuff, which is like, yeah, the Chinese car is very technologically advanced. We get that. You know, they're really, really flashy, but they're not safe. This is what our viewers, some of our viewers, they're like, can it possibly be safe? And I brought up a couple points to share. Now, Zeekr X is a great example of a new Chinese car that is the safest electric vehicle tested in 2024 by Euro NCAP.
Really?
It's safer than Porsche Macan EV by quite a bit, according to their testing. So Geely Group, really amazing safety, but also BYD. The BYD Tang EV received a 5-star safety rating from Euro NCAP, demonstrating exceptional performance in crash protection and advanced safety technologies. Another car, Neo ET5, achieved a 5-star Euro NCAP in 2023, a notable 96% score in the adult occupant category, making it one of the safest vehicles tested that year. And, you know, the list goes on and on. And I think the biggest thing I learned about spending time in China is the buyer of a Chinese car is way more concerned about safety than a Western car buyer.
Really?
Yeah, so when people go and buy cars here, like safety, half the people don't even think about it. Very few people do think about it passionately.
So there you go. China, it is not unimportant in China. It is very important. It's more important than it is here, and the cars are safe.
Yes, and we're talking about this because China has figured out how to make cheaper EVs. They're the only ones that have really conquered it. And we're not seeing them so much here in North America, but of course they are exporting to lots of different places. And it proves that EVs can be made at scale and that they can be cheap. Okay, so we've got a story here from Electrek. More statistics for you because we are very much looking back on how things have changed since we started the podcast. And in generally over history as well, 90% of new U.S. capacity for the grid in 2024 was renewables. This is an amazing statistic. 81% of that was solar. So solar by far is, the biggest portion of this and kind of the easiest and cheapest thing to put up right now in terms of renewable energy. So I looked back at some statistics from 5 years ago, and wind was doing better 5 years ago. I was a little surprised by this. So in 2024, the U.S. put in 3,100 megawatts of wind, but back 5 years ago, it was 9,100 megawatts of wind. And only 5,300 megawatts of solar compared to 30,000 megawatts now done in 2024. So a big difference there. 14,000 megawatts of coal was retired back in 2019. And this year, only 2,300 megawatts of coal retired, but that's hopefully because a lot of it is already gone. So the more coal that is gone, the less that can be shut down. But then I came across this amazing statistic from Our World in Data, which is just a data-driven organization and website. And they report that it took 1 year back in 2004, so 20 years ago, it took a full year to install 1 gigawatt of solar around the world, and we now do that every single day.
Good God, that is a stark difference. Solar, as we've said, has become so much cheaper that's why it's happening, and it's got more momentum than wind.
Yeah, there seems to be less of a price drop on the wind lately, but, it's still viable.
Yeah, and the White House is trying to stop wind for no reason. So offshore is going to take a hit during the next few years, it seems, but onshore is private land, and you can't stop private land from doing what they want. At least currently you can't. So hopefully that will continue. Yeah, that's great. I want to remind people that we have a Patreon episode coming up, that we're going to stay in the bomb shelter for the Patreon episode and talk about some things like solar in Gaza and why China, how China became so dominant with exporting vehicles and making quality vehicles in just 5 years. That's coming up. Go to patreon.com/cleanenergypod, and you can find us there, and you can subscribe to the Clean Club to get that episode. But you can also subscribe for free just by setting up a free account and following us, and then we will have your name and email address, and it will pull it out of a hat, and you'll perhaps win 1 full year of Clean Club stuff.
So this is from New York City, from Fast Company. This is a recent story about congestion pricing in New York City. And we have mentioned this briefly, but I thought this article was a nice summary. This is 1 month after congestion pricing in New York City. And of course, other cities around the world have done this as well, places like London. It's an extra charge, basically, to drive your car downtown. So what they're really saying here, after a month, 1 million fewer cars.
Really? Wow.
Over that month in Manhattan. So this is absolutely working. It's less congested, it's less noisy, and it's less polluted. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of this kind of thing.
You know,
congestion.
when this happens in other parts of the world, people realize how clean the air is, and they say, well, we're not going back. We don't want to go back. So
Yeah.
And then how quiet it is.
No, in cities, often they will turn some streets into pedestrian malls, and that always turns out to be super popular. Nobody wants to turn those back into a road after that. You know, cars have ruled the day for the last 100 years, but hopefully, those days are ending.
All right. Well, it's time in the podcast schedule to give a shout out to our Patreon members, who some of them get weekly and some of them get monthly shout outs. So let's go through that. Green Bastard, Ryder, Brett Routley, you are on our Clean Club Executive. In the Clean Club Plus, Bob Armstrong and Wes S. Clean Club members currently are Andy Fessler, Joss Ennigan, Sean Hines, Timo Kellenberger, Peter O'Donnell, and Weldon Penner. Thank you, everyone, including you people who just are at a lower supporter level and don't get your shout-outs. We really appreciate you. Yeah, we go there, help us out, and get extra material. Whether you want to pay for it or not, we have all of our social media stuff there, and we will be right back.
The Clean Energy Show Lightning Round.
It's time for the lightning round. At the Bloomberg NEF Summit, Nat Bullard says Ozempic is throwing a monkey wrench into climate forecasts because fatties like me might end up eating less food. Less food? Less pollution, Brian.
I had not heard that
It is
before.
actually in effect. Remember, I mentioned last week that 15% of Americans are on Ozempic, and 50% probably should be. Not that I'm endorsing it, because I think it's going to kill us all one day and turn us into zombies. Baltic states sever their last ties to Russian power grid. You had that story earlier. Over $2 trillion with a T, that's a trillion with a T, was invested in the global energy transition last year, the highest ever amount. That is a lot of money, and it outdoes fossil fuels. Exposure to air pollution can make it harder to focus, a study suggests. That's what it finds, and that might explain me lately, because I live by an oil refinery and I'm having a hard time concentrating. It was time for a CS Fast Fact. There are more STEM grads in China. STEM, what is that? Science, technology, engineering, and math. There are more STEM grads in China than all the grads in the United States every year. It's got to tell you that we're screwed by China. Like, they're going to dominate us, and we have to come up with a plan, and I don't know what's even possible because, yeah,
There's only so much we can do. We're just one podcast. We can't.
We can warn people.
Yeah.
We can warn people. There are so many engineers in China, they actually get hired for cheap. This is what I'll talk about on the Patreon podcast too, because it doesn't matter, because housing becomes very cheap there as well. And you don't need to earn a lot of money, and you can go buy your EV because those are cheap. Carbon brief analysis. UK would need a forest twice the size of London to offset the new airport expansion. So yeah, to offset that, you need a forest twice the size of London. Global EV battery market share in 2024. Here's the roundup that we have in now. CATL, the world's largest battery maker, they are in China, is 37.9%. Let's call it 38. And BYD is at 17.2. And here's the interesting thing. CATL continued to remain the world's largest power battery maker 2024, but it's getting bigger. The percent of the old is bigger, so they're really dominating. The 699-year-old Oxford University has replaced its gas heating system with heat pumps. I imagine, when they first got gas, that was revolutionary compared to whatever they did.
Yeah, it was probably not heated by a stinky fireplace in the corner.
At best. So yes, they are changing to heat pumps at 3 accommodation buildings. This will reduce the college's largest source of carbon emissions, the heating. How much energy does ChatGPT query consume? If you ask it something, 3 watt-hours per query.
Well, that's not terrible.
3 watt-hour, depends what you're asking, though. However, in this week's gradient update, we find that it is probably 10 times less than that for a typical query today. They're getting more efficient with their updates, which is good. The internal combustion engine Chevrolet Blazer, which is a popular vehicle, you see them all over the place here, will be phased out in North America by GM to make way for more EVs. And you can read about that on caranddriver.com. Fossil fuel subsidies are now more than $1.2 trillion US just in the G7 countries. Just in the G7 countries, $1.2 trillion for fossil fuels. That is insane. That is absolutely insane.
Yes, and we have talked about that over the years, and I don't recall that number ever getting smaller, even though we should be well past
It's insane.
the age of
I think
subsidizing.
you can solve world hunger with that. I've seen figures like that, and decarbonize the world for not much more than that, at least on a yearly basis. Oh, it's time for another CES Fast Fact. A single aircraft fueling hose delivers more joules of energy per minute than a nuclear power plant.
Okay.
So suck on that one. The energy density of liquid fuels is incredible.
Well, and that's why we've ended up with gas cars for such a long time, because you can get a lot of energy out of a gallon of gasoline. But of course, there is a side effect, and that side effect is global warming.
Throughout 2024, wind and solar generated a record third of Chile's electricity, more than double what they did in 2019. That's pretty good, Chile. And finally this week, BYD will enable advanced driver assistance features in almost all future models at no additional cost to buyers. In other words, it's like a seatbelt. It's just going to come with the car. We're talking Tesla self-driving pretty much, just for free. And what they charge, like, $15,000 for that in Canada? Well, you can buy a car for that in China, and then it comes with the free self-driving built in. That's incredible. This is a pretty aggressive move, Brian, and it's going to challenge Tesla and all their other domestic rivals in China, where it's a cutthroat electric vehicle market. BYD plans to install on its entire model lineup, including the sub-$10,000 Seagull budget hatchback, even that one. So dubbed God's Eye, the driving system was developed in-house by BYD and will equip the carmaker's mass-market models with features commonly only found on upscale EVs, such as remote parking via smartphones and autonomous overtaking on roads. Advanced driver assistance systems were no longer an unattainable luxury, but an essential tool, like safety belts and airbags, said BYD's founder at an event recently. This vision system is a vision-only system, is camera-only, like Tesla, So there's no cost of LiDARs, the cheap ones. Maybe the expensive ones have LiDARs and radar sensors, but the cheap ones will only have cameras. Last year, light vehicles with so-called level 2 partial automation features accounted for only 8.5% of the Chinese market. Only? That sounds like a lot. Longer term, we see Chinese automakers taking the lead on intelligence innovations and democratizing these technologies in mass market cars, said UBS analyst Paul Gong. And basically, Musk is, charging the price of a car for his thing, and they're throwing it in for free. So BYD is building its own AI data center to take care of all this stuff. It has 5,000 engineers working on advanced driver assistance systems. It has China's large auto cloud data set to train ADAS models, and BYD says L2, level 2 automated driving plus ADS will necessarily be a necessity on all vehicles starting in 2025. And it will be as common as seatbelts and safety bags in 2 to 3 years. That was a game changer in our world.
I'm old enough. We had a car when I was a kid. One of our cars was a 1960 Ford station wagon. And I remember reading the owner's manual, and seatbelts were optional in that 1960 model. And we had the seatbelts in our version of that car. But yeah, obviously cars need to get a lot safer, and all of this is coming.
That's it for this week for the Lightning Round. Remember to stay tuned for the Patreon podcast if you are a Clean Club member for more.
And yeah, you can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, Clean Energy Pod. Join the Patreon, which we've talked about this week, and the merch store. It's all there.
Okay. Thank you to all our Patreon members who are Clean Club executive members. And Down, we thank you, and we will give you shout outs on the video podcast as well. You can also get ad-free episodes there in addition to our bonus podcast and lots more perks. We'll see you again in 7 days. Thanks for tuning in to our 5-year anniversary.
Yeah, see you next week and for the next 5 years.